Hi, dreamers. This is Nick.
And this is Andy, and we host The Concession Stand, a podcast from two guys who work in the TV and movie business right here in Los Angeles.
And you're listening to California Dreaming, true crime tales from the Golden State on the Orbital Jigsaw Network.
If any of you out there listening are from California or have been to California, more specifically Northern California, then you've likely heard of a place called Napa Valley. Napa County is located north of San Francisco and is known for its more than 400 wineries and hillside vineyards dotting the fertile soils of the valley's wine region. With its premier cultivation of grapevines, world-renowned Cabernet Sauvignon, lavish resorts, mixtures of charming bed and breakfasts and modern hotels, and top-rated chefs at scores of restaurants, gourmet public markets, hot air balloon rides, wine tasting tours, and vintage locomotive Napa Valley wine train makes California's wine country one of the greatest travel destinations in the world. George Yount was an early settler in Napa County. In 1836, Yount obtained the Mexican grant Rancho Heinous, where he built what is said to be the first log house in California. Soon afterward, he built a sawmill and a grain mill, and he was the first person to plant a vineyard in the county. Following Yount's death in 1865, the town of Yountville was named in his honor. The town of Napa was founded on Rancho Entre Napa in 1847. Following the event of the Mexican-American War, Bear Flag Revolt in 1846, settlers were granted deeds from the original ranchos during the 1850s through the 1870s. Napa County was formed and became one of the original California counties when the state became a part of the Union in 1850. Descendants of George Yount and Captain Edward Bale were key to the early development of Napa County. When Yount's granddaughter married Thomas Rutherford in 1864, the couple was gifted land in an area of the valley that is now known as Rutherford. Rutherford established himself in the area as a serious grower and producer of fine wines. Bale's oldest daughter, Lolita, married Seaman Lewis Bruck, and when Bale died in 1848, Bruck became the executor of the family will. He was elected the first mayor of Napa City when it was incorporated in 1872. Lolita's younger sister, Carolyn, married Charles Krug, a pioneer grower of grapevines. They too were gifted land. Krug eventually moved north and established the valley's first commercial winery. John Patchett opened the first commercial winery in the county in 1859. His vineyard and wine cellar were located in an area that is now within the city limits of Napa. Krug founded his own winery 2 years later. The county's population began to grow as pioneers, prospectors, and entrepreneurs moved in and set up residence. During this time, settlers primarily raised cattle and farmed grain and fruit crops. Mineral mining was also pivotal to the economy of the county. While gold was being prospected in other areas of California in the 1850s, Napa County became a center for silver and quicksilver mining. Throughout the 1860s, mining was going on in the Napa area on a very large scale. By the end of the 1800s, there had been, I'm going to try to pronounce this as best I can, phylloxera infestation in the county's vineyards, which was quite damaging to the agricultural economy. And for those who don't know, such as myself, those are grapevine pests that can be found all over the world that were originally native to eastern North America. They feed on the roots and the leaves of the grapevines, eventually causing water to be cut off from the plant and eventually killing them. Farmers decided to plant over 500,000 fruit plants and nut trees in the county particularly prunes and pears, which help soften the blow caused by the phylloxera, which, by the way, was also followed by 13 years of the 18th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, prohibition, which could have very well collapsed the entire wine industry of the Napa Valley. When the amendment went into effect on January 15, 1920, the production, sale, and transport of intoxicating liquor was banned. In the months between the passing of the act and its instatement, some vineyard owners tore out their vines and replaced them with orchards. Others, however, recognized the continuing marketability of grapes, since the sale and transport of fresh or dried grapes was not banned under the new amendment, though the law explicitly stated that if the shipper knew that the final buyer was going to use the grapes for the making of wine, both the buyer and the seller could be charged with conspiracy. Instead of collapsing under the constraints of the new law, a few industrious entrepreneurs did what they could with the loopholes they were able to find in the prohibition law. Growers were confident that grapes to be used in wines would pass through the hands of a sufficient number of wholesalers and buyers that any charges would be difficult to prove. The sale of Napa County grapes proved to be an incredibly lucrative endeavor during Prohibition, able to reach buyers all over the country. Agriculture in Napa County continued to remain diverse until late into the 20th century, when wine grapes had once again become the primary focus. While vineyards were planted on well over 90% of the agricultural land in the county, by the end of the 20th century, modern-day farmers have recently begun exploring the possibility of raising other food crops in order to diversify once again and to take advantage of the favorable growing conditions. Unfortunately, as I write this, wildfires are currently burning in the Northern California area. At least 41 people have died as a result of the aggressive nature of the fires which span Napa, Sonoma, Yuba, and Mendocino counties. The fires have destroyed 5,700 homes and businesses, and at least 23 of the world-renowned wineries and vineyards have been damaged or destroyed. As of the week of October 16th, the fires, which began on October 8th, have been the deadliest wildfires in the history of the state of California. Our thoughts and prayers go out to those who lost their lives, their families, and loved ones, to all of those who have been affected by these devastating fires, and to those who lost their homes and their businesses. We also send our deepest thanks and gratitude to the women and men who are working tirelessly to get these fires under control. Thank you. Today, we are going to take a detour into the heart of wine country with this week's story. It is a tragic tale of a brutal double murder that took place in this, one of California's most picturesque locales, on Halloween night. In this episode of California Dreaming, the tale of the Napa Valley Nightmare. In 2004, in a lovely little house on Dorset Street in Napa Valley, California, lived 3 roommates: Adriane Insogna, Leslie Mazzara, and Lauren Mienza. Adriane, a 26-year-old civil engineer at the sanitation district, and Lauren, a 27-year-old volleyball coach at a nearby community college, had first rented out the house together. Lily Prudhomme was friends with both roommates, but was particularly close to Adriane. The two were the best of friends who met at work and quickly became close. When Adriane and Lauren got the house, Lily was kind of jealous because it was such a lovely place. But for whatever reasons, Lily didn't go in on roommating with her friends. But remember Lily. She will play a significant role later on in this story. In June of 2004, Adriane and Lauren invited a third roommate to share their home, 26-year-old Leslie Mazzara. Unlike Adriane and Lauren, who were locals to the area, Leslie, born August 1st, 1978, was a transplant from South Carolina. She was a graduate of the University of Georgia with a bachelor's degree in philosophy. She also happened to be a Southern beauty pageant queen. She was 2002's Miss Williamston, South Carolina, and in 2003, she competed in the Miss South Carolina pageant. Following a difficult breakup, Leslie picked up and moved clear across the United States and landed in Napa Valley, California, where she got a job at the Neilbaum Coppola Winery as a sales associate. And yes, that's Coppola, as in Francis Ford Coppola. You may have heard of him before. He's directed some films like The Godfather, The Great Gatsby, The Outsiders, etc. Anyway, Leslie, new to the area, was excited to embark on this new chapter in her life here on the West Coast. She was quite a stunningly beautiful woman. Newly single, she was definitely looking to meet new friends and get back into the dating scene. The girls settled into their new home quickly, and as far as anyone could see, life was good. So, on that Halloween night of 2004, the roommates passed out candy to trick-or-treaters and were in bed by 11:30. Leslie and Adriane had separate bedrooms upstairs, and Lauren had a bedroom downstairs, and her dog Chloe slept in her room with her. At approximately 2 in the morning, Chloe began growling, which woke Lauren up. She stayed quiet and listened. She could hear some noises, some footsteps going up the stairs. She thought maybe one of her roommates had gone out with a boyfriend and they were just getting home. But suddenly, she started hearing what sounded like a struggle or some fighting, and then she heard some screams coming from upstairs. When she peered through her bedroom door, it was very dark, but she could see the shadowy figure of a man running down the stairs, back out through an open front window. She was unable to see his face. All was quiet. So she made her way up the stairs to check on her roommates. She came to discover that both of them had been stabbed repeatedly. She even slipped and nearly fell on some kind of liquid. Turns out, it was the blood of her roommates. She ran down the stairs and out of the house and frantically called 911. By the time paramedics arrived, Leslie and Adriane were dead. Later, the autopsy reports would show that they were both stabbed multiple times, but there was no sexual assault. From what investigators could see from the crime scene, it appeared that the killer attacked Leslie first while she slept. It is surmised that she likely never saw what was coming. It's not clear if the attack on Leslie had awoken Adriane, but what is clear is Adriane put up a fight against her attacker. She had indications of defensive wounds, and her attacker himself was injured during this struggle. After he was done stabbing Adriane, and as he made his way down the stairs and back out that front window which he initially gained entry, he bled. He cast his own blood on the walls of the house. It dripped on the floor. He got it on the window blinds, and it got on the side paneling of the house. Investigators were also able to determine that, based on the location of the bloodstains that he had left behind, that it was likely he cut his hand while stabbing the girls. And in the places that he was bleeding, it appeared that it was coming from his right hand, which meant that was the hand that he was probably stabbing with, telling investigators that their suspect was right-handed. This was good evidence if investigators could find the person who left all of this blood behind. Like I said, the girls were not sexually assaulted, and the home wasn't robbed. So if you're like me, you might be scratching your head. What's the motive? I am big on motive, especially when there's a mystery as to who could have done such a thing to these seemingly well-liked girls in this relatively safe community. Up until that night, there hadn't been a murder in Napa since 2001. And even as of the day that I'm writing this, there have been 0 murders in Napa this year. So for this to happen in this community was a shock. The biggest question needed to be answered: who would do this? Investigators were determined to find out who, and the next logical questions is to ask why. Who would have a reason to do something like this to Leslie and Adriane? This knife attack, this multiple stabbing type of event. You and I have heard many times in the past that these types of killings are up close and personal. So, did the nature of their killings mean that they knew the person that did this to them? That's where investigators were wanting to start, the inner circle of these girls, because it appeared that the person who did this was familiar with the layout of the home as well. He knew where he was going when he went up those stairs and stabbed them in their bedrooms. Who was around them and in their lives at this time that they were murdered? Who was the intended target, Leslie or Adriane? They turned their sights towards those who'd been closely interacting with the girls leading up to this happening. It wasn't going to be an easy task sorting through all these people and all of the friends of the victims associated with them around this time, especially Leslie, who was new to the area. She was working with new people at the winery. She interacted regularly with many, many people at her job. She was looking to meet new people and make new friends, and to start dating as well. Both Adriane and Leslie had recent troubled relationships. So, with no witnesses to this crime that could positively identify a suspect right away, investigators were going to have to look at anyone and everyone who had a connection to the girls. The early theories were that the killer was someone who had been interested or infatuated with either Leslie or Adriane. Fortunately, investigators had the DNA profile of the killer to link the suspect to the crime scene. Now, it was a matter of matching that DNA to the person who left it behind. Investigators entered the DNA profile into the Combined DNA Index System, or CODIS, a database of more than 4 million known offenders, but there was no match. They were going to have to try to find the DNA match the hard way. Another clue that investigators found inside the house, near the window that was the point of entry, was a bundle of zip ties, the same kind that police might use in situations where they need to do some sort of crowd control. They use these kind of zip ties as makeshift handcuffs when they need to detain a large number of people. There was a rubber band around this set of zip ties, holding them together in the bundle. This piece of evidence led investigators to surmise that the killer was coming into the home with this crime seemingly planned out, prepared to restrain the victims, knowing that there was more than one person in the house, that he might need these zip ties in order to establish control of the victims. But he dropped them, probably never even realizing it, and found himself having to kill the girls in somewhat of a frenzied manner, a manner in which he ended up injuring himself, leaving all of that blood evidence all over the home. Later forensic testing of the rubber band around the zip ties would reveal traces of DNA left on it that matched the DNA of the bloodstains left by the killer. There was another clue investigators found at the crime scene: cigarette butts. 2 of them discarded near the front porch and 1 in the backyard. All of them smoked all the way down to the filter, so there was no brand name that was visible anywhere on the butt of the cigarette. However, there was a small gold band around where the cigarette connects to the filter that had a series of gold trident-like shaped images around it. Through some further investigation, it was determined that the brand was Camel, and the type of cigarette was a relatively new brand and only sold at a few stores in town: Camel Turkish Gold. Detectives surmised that whoever committed this double murder had spent some time sitting outside the house smoking, perhaps building up the nerve to carry this murder out. And while he sat there, he smoked these cigarettes and discarded them in the yard. Cigarette butts are an excellent source of obtaining DNA evidence. So, those were collected and sent to the lab for testing. If the results prove that the DNA from the cigarettes match the DNA from the blood evidence left behind by an injured killer, then it was a very, very important clue to his identity. Not only would the DNA be important, but also this rare brand of cigarettes that this person smokes would be a very strong piece of identifying evidence. Police chose not to release this information quite yet to the media. They kept it very close to the vest while they worked on sorting through suspects until the DNA results would come back from the lab. Although police didn't let very much information out into the community, there was a thought amongst residents that these killings might possibly be the work of a serial killer. The nature of the crime was so violent that it was a possibility police had to take into consideration. There had never been a serial killer in the city of Napa, although Northern California has historically had its fair share of serial killers. So with these killings looming over the pristine Napa Valley community, they rallied together to raise a $100,000 reward for any information leading to the arrest and conviction of the person responsible for Leslie and Adriane's deaths. In addition, that bundle of zip ties also led investigators to think that the serial killer theory was plausible, though they did not release that information to the public either. They surmised that the killer came into the home with a plan, and part of that plan included binding these girls with zip ties. And for police, this is the worst kind of violent crime to investigate, the kind where the perpetrator is unknown to the victim. And with no known link to the girls, there is a seemingly infinite possible pool of suspects to try and sort through. Police began the daunting task of interviewing anyone and everyone who had any kind of interaction with Leslie and Adriane prior to their killings. Leslie in particular, being the beautiful pageant contestant, had many, many admirers. Even if they weren't dating, men would still try and talk to her and even buy her gifts. Many, many men were taken with Leslie. She had just broken up with her last boyfriend right before she moved to Napa, and he was someone she was very much in love with. But her boyfriend's father appeared to have a strange obsession with her as well, and would call to talk to her pretty frequently, which made Leslie very uncomfortable, ultimately resulting in her ending the relationship. Even on that fateful Halloween day, phone records showed that her ex-boyfriend's father had called her twice. But as it would turn out, it was only an unfortunate coincidence. Both he and his son were clear across the country in South Carolina when Leslie and Adriane were killed. They also both submitted DNA samples, and both were cleared as suspects. Back in Napa, police were going through anyone and everyone they could find that had any kind of interaction with Leslie and asking for DNA samples, and the same went for Adriane. All in all, investigators interviewed more than 1,000 people and took DNA samples from more than 200 men, and none of them were a match. While the police investigation as to who did this was seemingly dragging on, they were making some progress with the forensic investigation. DNA experts were able to use some groundbreaking forensic tests that were able to somewhat narrow down the identity of the killer. First, they quickly determined that the blood left on the walls, window blinds, and the siding of the house did contain the XY chromosome. So that confirmed that the killer was indeed a male. But they were able to go further than that. Investigators sought out the help of a particular DNA expert to see if he could use the killer's DNA to find out any other useful information about the suspect that could help move the investigation along. There was a new forensic technique that had been recently developed that could determine a person's physical characteristics. This would greatly help in narrowing down the focus of the investigation if they knew a little bit more about the killer's physical attributes. How this works is not looking at the DNA as a whole. 99.9% of all human DNA is alike. The new forensic techniques zero in on the remaining 0.1%. That's the part that sets us apart physically, and what it does is compares the polymorphisms in the DNA of people from other countries. This enables scientists to identify the ethnic background of the person who left the DNA behind. So, the DNA left at the scene of Leslie and Adriane's murder turned out to be primarily of Northwestern European ancestry, with a very small amount of Southeastern European ancestry. No Middle Eastern, or South Asian, or African. So this meant the person who killed the girls wasn't Hispanic, African American, or Asian either. This information gleaned from the DNA certainly narrowed down the focus of the investigation in terms of who they should be looking at when identifying suspects. They also found in the killer's DNA a marker that indicated that he had either blue or green eyes, and most likely light-colored hair. Approximately 11 months after the killings, investigators decided to go public with the information they had about the killer. A press conference was held, and everything they had was laid out for everyone to know. They gave the information about the DNA, indicating the killer was a white male with blue or green eyes and light-colored hair, and that he was right-handed, and that he smoked Camel Turkish Gold cigarettes. They also said the killer was known by the victims. The pressure was on now, and it was especially hard on one particular Napa resident. This press conference was a game changer for everyone involved, but I will come back to this in just a little bit. I wanted to talk a little bit more about Lily Prudhomme. Remember her? I mentioned her earlier towards the beginning of the episode. She was the best friend and co-worker of Adriane. Well, Lily had been very outspoken about the killings of her best friend and her best friend's roommate. She had participated in an on-camera interview with 48 Hours. She spoke fondly of Adriane. She expressed her strong desires to find out who in the world would do something like this to her best friend. As the days and weeks were passing, with no arrests having been made, these killings were haunting her. The feeling in the community was the same. Someone was lurking amongst them. Someone capable of committing this horrendous crime. Lily was genuine on television in her interview. Her sadness and grief was palpable, and she desperately wanted justice for her friend. Not long after the killings, Lily Prudhomme became Lily Copple. She had been in a long-term relationship for more than 8 years by this time this double murder had occurred with Eric Copple. But it had been a troubled one leading up to that Halloween night. Lily had been engaged to Copple. They had originally set their wedding date for November 1st, 2004, the very day that Leslie and Adriane were murdered. But for some reason, the date had either been canceled or postponed. In her interview with 48 Hours, she had even said that she was scheduled to get married that day. If they had gone through with the wedding, Adriane and Lauren, the third roommate, would have been in Hawaii with her. But it was not to be. The wedding did not happen that day. So, in a renewed sense of priorities, putting things into perspective, following the tragic loss of her close friend in such a violent way, it seems as though Eric and she reevaluated their lives. They decided to push aside whatever it was that was causing them to call off the wedding in the first place, and went ahead and got married several months after the murders. Adriane's mom was invited to speak at the wedding, which she did. She spoke directly to Lily and Eric as she read from scriptures from the Bible, Solomon 8:6, that stated, "Set me as a seal upon your heart, set a seal upon your arm. For love is strong as death, passion fierce as the grave. Its flashes are flashes of fire, a raging flame." Lily had picked those verses in honor of her friend, and Adriane's mom and Lily remained close after Adriane's death. The sadness still loomed over what was supposed to be one of the happiest days of Lily's life. With the loss of her friend having been compounded by the fact that there hadn't been an arrest, she refocused on her relationship with Eric. She turned to him for the love and support she seemed to be very much in need of at this point in her life. Lily and Eric, to friends and family, seemed like an odd couple. She was so friendly and social and outgoing, a stark contrast to his quiet, introverted disposition. He rarely talked to anyone when the two of them socialized with friends, but everyone just sort of chalked it up to that's just him being him. That was his personality. Whatever it was between the two seemed to work, as far as they could see. But something broke the couple up shortly before Halloween. Something caused them to cancel their plans to get married that November 1st. it seems that it was eating away at Eric that night. On Halloween, he tracked Lily down at a party she was attending. He wanted to talk to her about their relationship. He had been drinking heavily, and Lily didn't really want to be bothered with him at this Halloween party and asked him to leave and leave her alone. She ended up taking him home, but he wasn't finished for the night. He was frustrated. He was really frustrated with the way his relationship was going with Lily. He knew they had their ups and downs, but he felt as if he could talk to Lily himself, that he could get through to her. But there was one thing he was convinced of, that her friends did not like him. They didn't think he was good enough for Lily, and they knew she could do better. He felt like her friends were filling her head with all of these ideas about him and their relationship, that they were empowering her to not want to be with him anymore. Girls, you know what I'm talking about. We've all had that friend, and we've all been that friend, right? Well, I can't speak for everyone out there, but I know I've been through this sort of drama in the past between my man and my friends, and I've been that friend looking at my friend's relationship and the drama she's had with her man. And you know and I know, we eventually figure it all out. But you know the biggest red flag, and this has happened to me, is when your boyfriend or your husband makes the concerted effort to try and alienate you from your friends. That is like a big, huge red flag that something's not right. Guys, I'm not saying that you've got to like your girlfriend's or your wife's friends. You just have to let her be with them in the ways that she wants and needs to be with them. She will appreciate you for it, and so will her friends. So this Eric Copple guy, he felt as though his girlfriend's friends were standing in the way of his relationship with Lily. So he decided that he was going to make that mistake of alienating her from her friends. But unfortunately, he took that to a deadly extreme. So, what of this Eric Copple guy? Not a whole lot from what I've read about him. The word that stands out the most to me in the things written about him is unremarkable. He has small, beady little blue eyes, and he wore these weird wire-rimmed glasses. He had very sharp, pointed facial features. He had a job as a land surveyor. He was a meticulous, detail-oriented person, but very quiet and withdrawn. What some might describe as a wallflower, but a wallflower that is paying attention to every single little thing going on around him, taking it all in and keeping it all to himself. So when his wife was sitting across from the television camera and the reporter, speaking of her friend's killer, Copple was sitting right there in the room, off to the side and in the dark, watching over the whole thing, unassumingly, quietly supportive of his wife. Someone whose life had unexpectedly, apparently, intersected with the tragedy of this double murder. Until that Halloween night of 2004, Copple, when it came to any kinds of run-ins with the law, had not even a traffic ticket to speak of. But all of that would change. 11 months had passed since the killings of Leslie and Adriane when law enforcement held a press conference announcing the evidence found at the scene. The Camel Turkish Gold cigarette butts found on the front porch, the DNA match from the cigarette butts and the bloodstains on the walls, and how that DNA came from a white, blue or green-eyed, light-colored, right-handed male. The person feeling the pressure of the investigation narrowing in on him was Eric Copple, the now husband of the best friend of one of the victims, the very one who was read Bible scriptures to by the mother of one of the slain women. They were closing in on him, and he wasn't going to wait around for police to come knocking on his door. Within days of the police press conference, the parents of Eric Copple each received a suicide note from their son in their mail. The Napa County District Attorney read a portion of the letters on 48 Hours, as the letters haven't really been released to the public before. Copple wrote, "I'm leaving this life because I know the consequences of my actions must be faced," and they spelled death. "I will not grant the government the satisfaction of watching me die, so I will end my life in a place and manner of my own choosing. I do not consider it suicide. I call it justice." But Copple did not carry out his plans to commit suicide. After his parents received the letters, they contacted him and convinced him to turn himself into police. So, only 5 days after that police conference, on September 27th, 2005, a very soft-spoken, clean-cut, college-educated Mr. Eric Copple, with not so much as a speeding ticket to his name, walked into Napa Police Headquarters accompanied by members of his family and said, "I killed Adriane Insogna and Leslie Mazzara." I can only imagine the shock and surprise to see this young man walk into headquarters, taking responsibility for this horrendous crime. They spent 11 months interviewing over 1,000 people, testing the DNA of over 200 of them, looking for anyone from a sadistic, bloodthirsty serial killer to a heartbroken, crazed, obsessed stalker to the boogeyman. And here they are with this guy, Eric Copple, Lily's husband, a supposed friend of the girls. Of all the people, it was him, all along. He was promptly arrested and booked into custody for 2 counts of first-degree murder. When Adriane's mother, Arlene, got the phone call that an arrest had been made, naturally the first question out of her mouth was, "Who?" When she was told Eric Copple, I can only imagine her complete shock when she heard this news. Eric, Lily's Eric, just a few months earlier, having joined him at his and Lily's marriage, having read to them Bible scriptures as a tribute to their marriage and to the loss of her daughter, their friend. The one who sat quietly off to the side a couple of years earlier when his wife told 48 Hours that she hopes the person who did this is found. She herself said she can't imagine that the killer would be able to pull this off, this brutal double stabbing murder, and go unnoticed by those around him. That someone must have seen something odd or out of place. That someone who knew the killer must have picked up on some odd behaviors or a shift in demeanor. That someone must have noticed that someone had looked like they had been in a fight or a scuffle recently, with cuts or bruises on them since they had been injured at the scene and left blood evidence behind. She said it was important that the person who did this was caught. And why? Why did this happen to her friend? She wanted to know. This was her friend, and she wanted to know why they were killed in the manner in which they were. Yet, following the killings, she rekindled her relationship with Copple, married him a few months later, and for 11 months seemingly had no idea that he was responsible for these killings all along. No one really thinks that she had any idea. Police might have wondered, how could she not know? How could there not be any kind of suspicion? But on the flip side of that, neither did the police. He was right there all along. He was a part of the inner circle. They talked to 1,000 men, more than 1,000, and took DNA from over 200 of them. Yet they somehow overlooked Eric Copple. If they overlooked him, it's not that much of a stretch to understand how Lily could go for 11 months not knowing either. Adriane's mom would be the first to defend Lily, stating that the girls were like sisters. They were so close, and that there was no way that Lily could have known or suspected that her husband had any involvement in this crime. I too believe she had no idea. I mean, honestly, who would think that? If I were to put myself in her place, if one of my best friends were stabbed to death in her home, my mind would also go first to bloodthirsty serial killer or crazed obsessed stalker or even the boogeyman before I would even think it were my own husband. The fact that the killing happened on Halloween night would appear to me to be even more planned out by someone with a bizarre, sadistic plan. In this case, the answer was not crazy. The answer was simple, and it was right there in plain sight. Why, though? Why would he do such a thing? In his interviews and preliminary hearings, Copple was vague and elusive with the details. I talked about it earlier, which was a speculation as to the motive behind the crime, that he and Lily had broken up and he felt like Adriane had played a role in causing Lily to resist working on their relationship. That Halloween night, Copple had gotten drunk at a Halloween party. He wanted to talk to Lily, but she didn't want to deal with him in that state. According to his testimony, she gave him a ride home and left him there, but he did not stay home. He stated that he remembered waking up, getting the zip ties and a 5-inch knife, and driving over to the victim's home. He remembered smoking a couple of cigarettes by the garage, then prying open a kitchen window, climbing through. But according to Copple, everything gets apparently fuzzy as he states it. He says he doesn't know if he fell asleep or blacked out or just closed his eyes, but he says he doesn't remember stabbing Leslie or Adriane. I'm always skeptical of this selective amnesia, and I've heard it being used before. I don't know if it's truly a type of amnesia or if the killer just doesn't want to actually speak the words as to the violence they perpetrated, but he apparently had his wits about him enough to remember to burn his clothes in a fire pit after he got home from the killings. So, what to believe? I wanted to pause for a minute to talk about dissociative amnesia, formerly known as psychogenic amnesia. It's described as the temporary loss of recall memory, more specifically, episodic memory, which is the memory of autobiographical events, such as times, places, associated emotions, and other contextual who, what, where, when, and why knowledge that can be explicitly stated or raised. The collection of a past personal experience that occurred at a particular time and place. Dissociative amnesia is the loss of a particular episodic memory due to a traumatic or stressful event and is considered the most common dissociative disorder amongst those that are documented. Dissociative amnesia can occur suddenly or gradually and may last anywhere from a few minutes to many years, depending on the severity of the trauma and the person experiencing the amnesia. As far as Eric Copple's murder case, I'm not sure if or how claiming any kind of dissociative amnesia is going to do anything for him. He might have been staging himself for a possible insanity defense. If he were to end up going to trial for the murders he committed, his attorneys might argue that he was in an alcoholic blackout or in a dissociative state. But experts have concluded that only about 0.2% of the population actually experiences a dissociative amnesia episode. Yet the proportion of murderers who claim to experience it is much, much higher. As a matter of fact, in cases when we've seen killers confess to their crimes, they often remember every single detail of the attack, especially serial killers, mainly because it's said that they have this need to keep reliving it. Not that Copple would want to be the type of person to want to recall the horrible details of what he did. I'm just dubious about his claims of amnesia, especially since he remembered everything else about the evening. He might not want to think about the stabbing of those girls. I believe that. I'd also believe that he just doesn't want to talk about it. But I think the memory is there. Would Copple be able to use dissociative amnesia as any part of his defense if he were to stand trial for the double murder? The circumstances of the crime certainly make him eligible for the death penalty in California. He's confessed, so he's done it, and he can't necessarily plead not guilty. The girls were asleep, so he certainly can't plead self-defense. So what's left? Plead insanity? In order to be responsible for the crime, he must have had the mental state to commit it. Amnesia, the loss of memory caused by a psychological or physical trauma, is not the same thing as having the mental capacity required to commit a crime. The inability to remember committing a crime doesn't necessarily mean the defendant didn't intend to do so. A defendant's mental state at the time of the crime is what's important. Amnesia occurring after the crime has no effect on conduct at the time of the offense. So, amnesia typically isn't a viable defense. Memory loss isn't evidence that the defendant didn't know right from wrong when the crime occurred. However, amnesia, in some circumstances, can be a factor that courts can take into consideration when determining whether a person is competent to stand trial. There are some factors that the court may consider whether amnesia compromises one's ability to stand trial, such as whether the defendant is able to discuss the defense of the case, whether the amnesia is temporary or permanent, whether the crime can be reconstructed without the defendant's testimony, whether the state can effectively prepare the case, and the strength of the case against the defendant. The defendant has the right to a fair trial, and if he or she is claiming incompetency due to his or her inability to recall the events of the crime, he or she may not be able to assist his or her attorney in defending the charges against them. And lastly, on the topic of amnesia, it's rarely a determining factor of guilt or innocence, but the judge and or jury may take it into consideration when deciding the penalty for the crime when it comes to the defendant's motives or conduct at the time of the crime. That may be considered when determining sentence. When it came to Copple, I can't help but feel his so-called amnesia was just his unwillingness to speak the words describing what he did. He may have legitimately pushed those memories down so deep because he didn't want to think about them. I can't blame him for that, but he never went to trial. In order to avoid the possibility of a death sentence, on January 11th, 2007, Eric Copple pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. A part of the plea was that he had to meet face-to-face in court with the families of the victims so they would be able to deliver their impact speeches to him. Leslie's mom, Reverend Kathy Harrington, spoke directly to Copple. Her statement, in part, reads as follows. Leslie and Adriane's time to live was taken from them by a brutal and vicious murderer. In the fullness of time, Leslie and Adriane should not have died on November 1st, 2004. Their violent deaths were the result of an act of brutality that altered the rhythms of what God had hoped for them and destroyed the magnificent, sacred potentiality of two gifted and beautiful young women. The best way I can describe the ravaged landscape of my life after Leslie's death is to offer the image of a nuclear winter. The road I once traveled, the flowing stream of faith that used to nourish my body and soul, clean and clear the oxygen that was Leslie's life, and that once filled my lungs, the brilliant sunshine of her potential that illuminated my path are all gone. My broken heart still beats, yet my grief-stricken body struggles for breath, and my soul cries out for understanding and mercy. Mr. Copple, the brutality of your act has not only deprived me of length of years with my daughter Leslie, it has shattered my faith in the goodness of human beings. Not only you, but your loved ones are about to travel on a significant and perilous journey. For the rest of your life, you and your family will, unfortunately, experience what both your victims and our loved ones have felt: terror, desperation, hopelessness, violence, extreme fear, the collapse of everything you hold dear, the fragility of life, the loss of belief in personal safety, confusion, anger, the loss of physical contact with the ones you love, despair, the relentless images that assault your dreams and deny you rest, the horror of knowing you cannot protect your loved ones from the brutal acts of destruction. You and your loved ones will come to know what it means to journey through hell, seemingly without end. As your mother and your family will take this journey with you and will grieve as I do for the loss of their child, I pray for them. Eric, they who once held the promise of such potential for life in their arms. I'm told, Mr. Copple, that you have found God since your senseless rampage. Certainly while finding God sets you on the road to redemption, God does not grant cheap grace. Your salvation will come only when you accept full responsibility for what you have done, not only to Leslie and Adriane and to our families, but to your own family and friends. This will be very hard, as it will be difficult to practice the forgiveness that you seek in the terrible and violent world that you're about to enter. But it is right for us to hope that sometime, somewhere, down the long road ahead of you, that you will learn to take these murders into your heart like a man. Let the guilt tear and rip your heart from inside out, as your senseless and violent act resulting in the murders of Leslie and Adriane have done to all who love them and whose lives they touched. I know that I will navigate the rest of my life with a broken heart. As a mother and a minister, I wish I could tell you that I forgive you. At this time, I cannot. In fact, I can imagine that one day, when the shock and pain of hearing what Leslie endured eases, I might likely wish you were sitting on death row. Maybe it might make me feel better to know you will spend the rest of your life sitting in prison, wondering when and how you will die, waiting, wondering when will they come to kill you, terrified. It may seem only fair after what you have done. I also pray that I remember that my faith teaches me that every human being on earth has inherent worth and dignity, even you. And I pray that one day I will feel a measure of compassion and possible forgiveness even for you. I pray that someday I can be released from this hellish nightmare that have plagued my thoughts both day and night. I pray that somehow I can find something redemptive in this horrific tragedy that you have heaped on our lives. I pray to a God that I cannot even find most days to give me a moment's insight, just one holy instant, when I find something redemptive in this nightmare, some measure of wisdom that might provide every parent all that they need to love and nurture their children. I pray that all children might become all that God intended for them to be, that they will grow up to be loving and compassionate towards others, live decent lives, live happy lives. I pray that we will one day become a more compassionate nation and work toward creating a better world where every baby is recognized as a sacred gift deserving to be loved and nurtured. And finally, I pray that one day, never again, will any mother's child grow up to be a murderer. Adriane's mother, Arlene Allen, also spoke, her statement reading in part. Eric, you knew Adriane, and I know you. I know you are a man who brutally and callously took the life of a wonderful woman you never met, and you are the one who violently stabbed to death the best friend of the woman you loved. You cannot love Lily and murder her best friend. You cannot love Lily and bring a knife into Adriane's home and stab her again and again and again and again. She slammed her fist into the podium each time she said again. My baby never wore a turtleneck in her life, and yet she had to be buried in one. And still it could not hide the extent of her wounds. You are the man who is so cruel as to invite me, the mother of the woman you murdered, to stand up for you at your wedding, to read scripture to you of love and death, and to bless your union. Throughout that weekend, you brought me into the heart of your family, knowing all the while it was you who destroyed mine. So I say to you, Eric, go. Leave this world of family and friends, of hopes and dreams, of life and love and laughter. There is no place for you here. You will be forgotten. And when that door closes behind you today, I will think of you no more. Eric Copple hung his head as these statements were being read to him. He also gave an emotional statement to the court, sometimes difficult to understand between his sobs, but his statement read in part, I am a broken man. I cannot fathom an explanation for my sinful deeds. The terrible agony inflicted upon a great number of people, words evade me. I have always been an introverted person. My beloved grandfather suffered a stroke and died. I could not secure gainful employment. My relationship with Lily was in jeopardy and crashing. It was all like it fertilized the seeds of anger in my heart. There was a rage inside me. If I had only listened to those who pleaded with me to get help when I needed. Eric went on to say that he had suffered from depression and suicidal thoughts since he was a teenager, and that he used alcohol to fight this depression, but it only made things worse for him. He turned to Leslie and Adriane's mothers and their children and said, Arlene, Kathy, I am so sorry for stealing your beloved Adriane and Leslie. Paul, Andy, Lexi, and Allison, I am so sorry for taking your precious sister from you. Copple is currently housed at Pleasant Valley State Prison, located in Coalinga, California, which probably sounds more pleasant than it actually is, I'm sure. Thank you so much for joining me for this 17th episode of California Dreaming, the tale of a nightmare in Napa Valley. And just so you know, the girls over at Corpus Delicti also covered this very same case this week for their Halloween episode as well. They did a fantastic job, albeit funnier telling them the story than I did, but it's worth a listen if you need something to lighten the mood a little bit. Check out their show, Corpus Delicti, The Body of a Crime. When this episode goes live, it will be the weekend before Halloween. And I do have a very special Halloween Day bonus episode that will be available when the clock strikes midnight on October 31st. So keep a lookout for that. My family and I are taking a little road trip to Phoenix that same weekend before Halloween. So I'm looking forward to spending some time in the beautiful state of Arizona. And I'm racking my brain trying to think of a California/Arizona crossover true crime tale that doesn't start with a Jody and end with an Arias. Though I'm tempted because I was glued to that trial in 2013. But I think the story's been told plenty of times already. I do have a couple of ideas in mind. I figure if I can venture into Arizona, so can the show, right? So that's something I'm really looking forward to. And if you guys have any ideas, please share them on the discussion page or on Twitter. I'd love to get some ideas for the Arizona/California crossover episode that I'm thinking of doing. I also need to give a big, huge thank you to all of the new patrons that have generously contributed their support to the show. I can't express enough how absolutely grateful I am for you making your contributions to help me grow this little show of mine. I had a slight uptick in donations this week. I even had my very first $5 pledge, which I nearly fell over in disbelief. To all of you, Randy, Michelle, Llama Bug, Brittany, Karen, Rebecca, Timothy, and Christine, the newest patrons, I thank you. Also this week, you guys, I sent out a whole bunch of cards and stickers, some magnets, and all of the good stuff you guys have been asking for and that I've been promising to you. It's all in the mail. If you've messaged me your address, you should be receiving something from me very, very soon. I'd also like to thank everyone for their iTunes reviews over the past couple weeks. Heart Podcast, Brecky66, Mom of Too Many Dogs. That kind of sounds like me, but it's not. I didn't rate myself. And ABLH Pete. Don't forget to join the discussion group and like the Facebook page. You can follow me on Twitter at CaliforniaPod and on Instagram at California Dreaming Pod. And California Dreaming is also part of the Orbital Jigsaw Network of podcasts. We've joined forces with an amazing group of podcasts from a variety of genres, such as The Concession Stand, where hosts Nick and Andy geek out over all things entertainment, or Super Nerds UK, where hosts Ben, Ian, Tim, and Simon take an irreverent look at pop culture, or Busted Wide Open, a show where Nick and Sir Ian Dangerous take you on a weekly journey through the hottest news in sports entertainment, or Historium, a podcast devoted to the strange, obscure, or otherwise interesting stories from history, or Is This Adulting, where best friends Steven and Chris break down the stigma on mental illness through the lens of comedy, or the Dirty Bits podcast. Join host Tawny Plattis for her casual retellings of the sexy, scandalous, and salacious stories your history teacher likely left out. Or 4-1 Owned, a show where hosts GT, Dak, Kevin, Jack, and Matt fill your ear holes with all things gaming. If any of these shows sound like something that might pique your interest, visit them at www.orbitaljigsaw.com and click on their links. Also, don't forget to visit the Orbital Jigsaw family of podcast merchandise store, where you can get all sorts of California Dreaming stuff. T-shirts, hoodies, phone and laptop cases, stickers, mugs, and notebooks. Oh, and I'm hearing rumors that there will soon be tote bags, pillows, and tapestries. But I'll keep you posted on that. You can support me and your other favorite creators by visiting the Orbital Jigsaw store. As always, I will post the link in the show notes and on social media. Before I let you go, you need to hear about a couple of new true crime podcasts that I just got turned on to. Here,
Welcome
take a
to
listen.
Death Store Podcast, a podcast that explores some of the most haunting cases from America's death row. I'm the host, Dominique Mix, and I hope you'll join me weekly as I explore cases of the innocent and guilty, the executed and the exonerated, all of whom have one thing in common. They all know what it's like to look through the bars of a cell on death row. From the crime to the case's conclusion, I explore evidence, corruption, characters, and, of course, the crime itself. You can find the show on the Acast app, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or the podcast app of your choice. I hope you'll join in, and in the meantime, don't forget to hold your loved ones tight.
I'm Casey.
And I'm Samantha.
And we're the hosts of True Crime Storytime, a podcast for all things true crime.
We will be bringing you fortnightly episodes covering everything from murder and mysteries, disappearances, theft and fraud,
Abductions and kidnappings, and more importantly, trying to take a lesson away from each case, because every story has a message.
Thank you again for joining me for this episode of California Dreaming. I hope all of you have a fun and safe Halloween. And don't forget to keep an eye out for that special episode at midnight on October 31st. And until next time, sweet dreams.